I want to start with the man I was before, because the man I was before is the reason the story happened. And if I skip him, if I go straight to the drugging and the empty safe, and the morning I woke up on the floor of a hotel room in Cebu, not knowing what year it was, then I become a victim in a story about a crime. And a victim in a story about a crime learns nothing. He just suffers. I want to be the man who learned something, even if the tuition was everything I had. My name is Joe. I am 67 years old. I spent 28 years as a regional sales manager for a pharmaceutical distribution company in Memphis, Tennessee, which is a sentence that tells you, I spent 28 years talking people into things, reading rooms, finding the angle, locating the particular need a person had, and positioning my product as the answer to it. I was good at it. I was very good at it. I made good money doing it, and I am telling you this specific professional history because it is directly relevant to how a man who spent nearly 3 decades reading people professionally failed to read the one person who cost him everything. The irony is not lost on me. I have had 18 months to sit with the irony, and I can tell you it does not get lighter with familiarity. I retired at 65, a buyout package that was too good to refuse, and a left knee that had been sending memos about its position on another decade of airport floors for 3 years. My wife Carol had died 4 years before the retirement. Ovarian cancer, 14 months from diagnosis to end. And I had spent those 4 years doing the thing men of my generation do with grief, which is to work through it. By which I mean work instead of through it. By which I mean the grief was still exactly where it had been the day Carol died, sitting untouched in a room I had been walking past for 4 years without opening the door. I had a house in Memphis that I rattled around in, a pension, a social security check, 2 kids, Kevin in Dallas and Melissa in Atlanta, who called regularly and who I could hear, underneath the regular calls, the specific frequency of adult children monitoring a parent they are worried about and not sure how to say so. The Philippines arrived in my life the way it arrives in the lives of most men in my situation. Forums, YouTube, the testimonies of other retired Americans who had gone and found something they had not expected. I did 6 months of research. Spreadsheets, cost comparisons, healthcare assessments, visa options. I was a thorough man. I was a professional at gathering information and making decisions from it. I booked a one-way flight to Cebu City, and I landed in February, 16 months ago, with 2 bags and a retirement account that contained $240,000, which I am going to tell you now because the number matters to the story, and because pretending the number doesn't matter would be the first dishonesty in a story I am committed to telling, without any. $240,000. The savings of a man who had worked hard for 28 years and spent the last 4 of them not spending anything because there was nothing he wanted to spend it on and nowhere he wanted to go without Carol. I want to tell you about the first month because it was real and good, and I do not want the crime to erase what was true before the crime, which was that I landed in a place that was extraordinary, and that the extraordinary parts were not invented by my subsequent experience of it. Cebu City is a serious city. It has size and energy, and the specific complexity of a place that has been trading and building and growing for centuries. I stayed in a guest house in a neighborhood called La Hogue, and I ate at small places, and I walked in the evenings along the harbor, and I felt, for the first time in 4 years, like a man with a future, rather than just a past. I was in a good place. I want to say that clearly, because what came next was not the consequence of a man who was broken or desperate, or so lonely he had lost his judgment entirely. It was the consequence of a man who was in a good place, and who was therefore open, who had lowered the defenses that grief and loss and the Memphis house had built up over 4 years, who was receptive in the way that people are receptive when they have stopped expecting things to get better, and then things start getting better. That receptiveness was the condition that made everything else possible. A man still fully armored in grief cannot be approached in the way I was approached. The armor has to come off first. Mine had come off on the Cebu waterfront watching the harbor lights and deciding, consciously, that the future was a real country and I was going to try to live in it. I met her in the 3rd week. I am going to call her May. That is not her real name. Her real name is part of an ongoing legal matter, and I have been advised to use discretion, and I am going to follow that advice. Not because I feel any protection toward her, but because the name is irrelevant. The name is a brand, and the brand was the same as the rest of it, which is to say, constructed. May was sitting alone at a restaurant near the hotel, the kind of open-fronted restaurant that lines the streets in that city, and she was reading something on her phone with the expression of someone waiting for a person who is late and whose lateness is a pattern. I was eating alone at the next table. She looked up once and our eyes met in the way that eyes meet in restaurants when proximity makes it inevitable, and she looked back at her phone. I want to examine this opening, because in retrospect it was a technique, and at the time it felt like chance. The looking up and looking away. The appearance of preoccupation with something else. The body language of a woman who was not interested in being looked at, which is the most effective way to make a man want to look. I was a sales professional. I had used versions of this technique myself for 28 years. I did not recognize it when it was used on me because the context was wrong, because I was not in a conference room reading a pitch. I was in a restaurant in Cebu in the evening, feeling like a man whose future had recently reopened. And the combination made me stupid, in the specific way that hope makes you stupid. She glanced up again. I said something. I cannot remember what I said because whatever I said was not the point. The point was the opening. She closed her phone. She said the person she was waiting for had cancelled, which I later understood was a prepared line, and which in the moment I received as information about availability. We talked for 2 hours. She was 38. She told me she worked in real estate, commercial properties, which explained the business attire and the phone she kept checking, and the general impression of professional competence and controlled time. Her English was fluent in the specific polished way that suggested either education or extensive practice. She was warm without being excessive. She asked more questions than she answered, which I noted as a positive characteristic because it suggested genuine curiosity, and which I now understand was information gathering. Everything about her was calibrated. The warmth was calibrated. The interest was calibrated. The small, almost invisible vulnerabilities she let surface in that conversation, the brief mentions of a difficult previous relationship, the suggestion of someone who was careful about trust, these were calibrated. I was a sales professional for 28 years. I did not recognize a pitch. We exchanged numbers. She texted 2 days later. We met for coffee, then dinner, then 2 more dinners. 4 dates over 2 weeks, each one building on the last in the way that genuine connection builds, or in the way that the simulation of genuine connection builds. And from the inside, those 2 things are not distinguishable until it is very much too late. I want to tell you the warning signs because I missed every one of them, and you should not. Warning sign 1. She was always the one to suggest the next meeting. Always. In the language of what I was doing and what I had done for a career, she was controlling the pipeline. I was never left wondering if I would hear from her again because I always heard from her first. At the time I experienced this as refreshing, as a woman who knew what she wanted and pursued it. In retrospect, it was management. The target was never permitted to drift. Warning sign 2. She never let me pay for anything. 4 dates. And every time I reached for the bill, she had already handled it, quickly, almost before I could register what was happening. This is the inversion of the pattern that predatory romance targeting uses, which is usually the target paying for everything. May's method was different and more sophisticated. By paying, she was accomplishing 2 things. She was disarming my financial caution by demonstrating apparent financial independence, And she was creating an obligation. A man whose date keeps paying feels, if he has any sense of reciprocity at all, that he owes something. May was not taking from my wallet in those early weeks. She was building the debt that she would call in later. Warning sign 3. The progression was too fast. Not in the physical sense, in the emotional sense. 4 dates over 2 weeks, and the conversation was already at a depth that normally takes months. The thing she was supposedly careful about with trust, she was giving to me at a rate that should have seemed suspicious, and that I experienced as being special. She made me feel like the exception, like I had earned something other people hadn't. In sales we call this the exclusivity clause. You make the customer feel like they're getting something nobody else gets. I used it on buyers for 28 years. I did not recognize it when it was used on me. Warning sign 4, and this is the one I want you to hold, is the one I most want every man reading this to hold. She introduced a level of intimacy before the trust warranted it. Not physical intimacy, emotional intimacy. The sharing of things that felt private, felt confided, felt like she was taking a risk in telling me. Those confidences built a specific bond in me. The bond of being trusted with something vulnerable. That bond made me feel responsible for her. And responsibility is the most powerful sales close there is, because it comes from inside the buyer. You don't manufacture responsibility in someone. You create the conditions for them to manufacture it in themselves. And then it belongs to them, and they will protect it as their own. I was managing a bond I had manufactured for her. That is what was happening, and I did not know. The 5th date was different. She suggested a hotel bar in a different part of Cebu, nicer than the places we had been. A rooftop situation with a view of the city. I dressed up slightly, because the venue seemed to call for it. I arrived first and ordered water. She arrived 12 minutes late, which was the first time she had been late, and apologized with a warmth that made me dismiss the lateness rather than note it. We had drinks. She ordered for both of us after asking my preference, which I found considerate, and which I now understand was the mechanism. I had 2 drinks over 2 hours, which was not excessive by any measure, and which should not have produced what the drinks produced. I am describing this for anyone reading who has not encountered what pharmaceutical interference with alcohol does to a person. It is not like being drunk. Being drunk is recognizable from the inside. There is a gradient, a progression, a sense of your own state changing in a way you can track even as it changes. What happened to me was different. It was a wall. One side of the wall I was having a conversation on a rooftop in Cebu. The other side of the wall was the floor of a hotel room I did not recognize, in a light I could not interpret, with a pain behind my eyes that was the worst pain I had ever experienced, and a complete, total, terrifying absence of the time between. I do not know how much time passed. I found out later from the hotel records which the police accessed that it was 16 hours. 16 hours that I cannot account for. 16 hours during which May, or the person using that name, had access to my phone, my wallet, and the room safe in which I had, because I was a careful man, and always had been, written the combination to my bank account security codes in a small notebook, which I had thought was clever because the notebook looked like a cheap address book, and who steals an address book? May stole the address book. May had 16 hours with the address book and my phone and my cards and whatever she needed from my person to clear $240,000 across 3 wire transfers to accounts that the bank and the police would subsequently confirm were in the names of people who did not appear to exist. $240,000. Gone before I regained consciousness. I want to tell you what the first hours were like, because they are part of what I need you to understand. I came back on the floor, not the bed. The floor of a hotel room I had never booked, and whose address I did not know, and whose phone, when I found it plugged into the wall, with the particular neatness of someone who wanted to be sure I could make calls, connected me to a front desk in a hotel in a part of Cebu I had never been to. The room had been paid in cash, the front desk told me. One night, the guest name on the booking was my name, paid for with cash and booked in my name, and everything in the room was gone except my phone and my passport and the clothes I was wearing. She left my passport. I want you to understand the precision of that. She left my passport because a man without a passport in a foreign country cannot function, cannot access consulates, cannot establish identity, and the chaos of that situation would have consumed all the energy I had for the immediate period and delayed any coherent response to what had actually happened. A man with a passport can grieve and report and begin recovering. She left me the minimum I needed to function because a functioning man generates less immediate noise than a man in complete crisis. She had thought about it. The passport was a decision, not an oversight. I called Kevin, my son in Dallas. It was 3 a.m. Memphis time, and he answered on the second ring, and I said, "Kevin, something has happened." And my voice did not sound like my voice, and he knew it immediately. The way that children know their parents' voices, in frequencies that bypass language. He said, "Dad, are you safe?" I said I was safe. I was not robbed at gunpoint. I was not hurt physically. I was on the floor of a hotel room in Cebu, with nothing but a phone and a passport, and the worst headache of my life. He said, "Stay on the phone with me." He stayed on the phone with me for 4 hours. He walked me through calling the American consulate. He walked me through calling the bank, which confirmed the 3 transfers, which confirmed the total, which said the words that Kevin heard from Dallas, and that I heard from the floor of a hotel room in Cebu, that together added up to the thing that was true, and which I could not yet make my mind stay on. He booked a flight for himself to Cebu for the next afternoon, because that is the kind of son Kevin is, and I want that said plainly. He left his job and his wife and his kids and flew to Cebu because his father was on a floor. I called the police from the hotel. The hotel manager, a man named Bobby who had been manager of that establishment for 11 years and who had a specific quality of calm that I would later understand was the calm of someone who has seen versions of this situation before, came to the room himself when the desk told him what had happened and sat with me while I waited for the officers. He brought water. He brought coffee. He did not leave until the police arrived. He did not ask me anything about how it happened. He just sat there, in the calm that the situation needed someone to provide, and provided it, without making a production of it. The police officers were 2 men, calm and professional, and they did something I had not expected, which was that they did not make me feel like a fool. I had expected to feel like a fool. I had been steeling myself for it in the hours on the floor, preparing for the particular shame of a 67-year-old former sales professional, explaining that he had been outwitted by the most basic mechanism of predatory romance, expecting the raised eyebrow or the barely suppressed expression that would tell me the officers had seen this 100 times and had opinions about the men it happened to. There was none of that. The senior officer, a man whose name I will not include because I have not asked his permission, took my statement with the thoroughness of someone who takes the crime seriously. He told me this was a known method. He used the word syndicate. He said that what had been done to me was not the improvisation of one person, but the operation of a structured criminal organization that targeted foreign nationals, primarily older men traveling alone, primarily in the first months of their arrival, before they had the local knowledge and the local connections that made them harder targets. He said the people involved were skilled. He said I was not the first. He said the investigation would go in a direction I might not see results from quickly. He said the results were not predictable. He said all of this with the directness of a man giving me accurate information rather than comfortable information, and I appreciated it more than I can say. Kevin arrived the next afternoon. He walked into the hotel room, which I was still in, because Bobby the manager had not charged for the extra night and had brought me meals without being asked. And he looked at me for a moment. Then he crossed the room and held me the way he had not held me since he was a child, his arms around a father who had been larger than him for 50 years, and who was, in that room, smaller. And I cried in the specific way that I had not cried since Carol died. The unlocking kind. The kind that means something that has been held for a very long time has finally been let go. Kevin said, "We're going to figure this out, Dad."